we've all probably learned, if nothing else, from this last, I guess, 2 years now, communication plays a vital role in public health. There's never been a time, I think, in our lifetime, certainly, where communication and public health have intersected in such vital and important ways. And to discuss that today, we have two phenomenal speakers. I'm so honored that they have agreed to join us today. And we're going to be hearing a lot from them later on. First of all, we have Ms. Melissa Fox, who is the Chief Operating Officer for Ascenda Integrated Health. She is a Rowan alumna with a distinguished 20+ years of leading operations management, innovation, strategic growth, partnerships, development for various types of healthcare organizations, including federally qualified health centers, healthcare for the homeless, behavioral health, HIV/AIDS care, home care, and hospice. She led a multidisciplinary team to launch the first homeless medical respite program in Philadelphia. She has served as an expert speaker for organizations including National Healthcare for Homeless Council, National Nursing Centers Consortium, Philadelphia Social Innovations Journal, and the Philadelphia Housing Authority. And she is also the author of No Weapon Formed, an exploration of Black women's experience in America and how we can move toward healing together. And then, of course, we also have Dr. Sophia Onoye-Onyia, who is the founder and CEO of the Sophia consulting firm, host and producer of Amplifying Scientific Innovation. She is a Nigerian-American entrepreneur and life science strategist who uses her multidisciplinary scientific background as a Pfizer scientist and Yale postdoctoral researcher in diverse therapeutic area expertise to advise clients in the life science industry on impact-driven market strategies and communications tactics across traditional, online, and social media. As I mentioned, she's the founder and CEO of the Sophia consulting firm and the host and producer and creator of the firm's Amplifying Scientific Innovation video podcast. We would encourage you to check it out. It focuses on scientific advocacy, health equity, and influential leadership. And she's had over, I think the last count I had was 60, but I'm sure it's many more recent guest appearances. And recent guest appearances include people like the CEO of the American Cancer Society and the Chief Medical Officer of WebMD. So truly, truly, two phenomenal leaders in the sciences and healthcare and communication. And again, so honored to have you here. If you do have questions for our speakers, I know we have a lot of students who have a lot of questions. If you do have questions, please feel free to put those in the chat. We will get those to the end. And we also have some student questions that we'll be asking early on. I wanted to start by noting kind of purposefully how I asked you to be here, because both of you have different trajectories that I think are interesting to complement. So Melissa, you were a communications major at Rowan.
Correct.
And then ended up in the healthcare field. And Sophia, you were a life sciences expert, a researcher at Yale, and ended up in communication. So it's kind of, they're interesting, and they're a little bit, you're at the same sort of places. So I wondered, we'll start with Melissa first, if you could tell us a little bit about how you got into the healthcare industry and science communication.
Yes, actually, and thank you so much for having me today. It's such an honor to be here to represent this amazing conversation. And it is so very necessary right now. So, when I graduated my communications degree, I ended up going to Texas and, kind of did the traditional. I went into marketing and was really using my voice and lessons that I'd learned in communications in kind of a traditional way. And so, but what I quickly realized was that those skills translated into true, business communications, strategic discussions, allowed me to be at the table in a different way as it related to what I was doing. So that allowed me to be promoted into different areas. So I went from very quickly being in the kind of the marketing, kind of the face and developing campaigns, into the development of the strategy and communicating with partners on how to move these initiatives forward. So it started out in kind of the traditional with marketing and advertising, but then really very quickly transitioned into the business realm.
It's fascinating you say that, because in researching both of you too, I know for Sophia, your MBA seemed to have been impactful in your communication. I mean, I will let you speak for yourself, but it's kind of interesting how these similarities, the overlap here. Could you talk with us, Sophia, about how you ended up having a communication consulting firm and a
Yeah,
bigger podcast?
yes. Well, nice to meet everyone. For me, I think even before I knew how to articulate it, my passion in life was always around amplifying scientific innovation. And it's quite unusual because I was born in Nigeria and in a very sort of conservative, male-driven, male-led society where women were not allowed to dream big. But I've always liked to defy rules. So I dreamt big and I was incredibly intellectually curious. I was just, how do I say this nicely? I was nosy, but I wasn't nosy about people. I was nosy about the Encyclopedia Britannica. So I'm like this 6-year-old, 7-year-old picking it up for fun. And you can imagine my siblings, I was the youngest of 5. They just thought I was weird. And that was it. And nobody else was a scientist. And I was just fascinated by science. So I think what I learned early on is that I have the ability to articulate the value of science to a diverse audience. So if I'm speaking with a physician or a scientist, I could tailor that. Obviously, when I'm 7 years old, I'm not speaking to physicians or scientists, but I knew how to communicate to my brothers who were not science majors. They had no interest, no desire. So I think there was that need or that understanding of communication early on, but it was science first. And so when I came to the US, and this is my 20th year in the US now, it was important for me to pursue my education. And I wasn't encouraged, but I did it anyway. And it wasn't until I came to Yale and I was doing my postdoctoral work in triple negative breast cancer research. And I was just like, I love science, but gosh, man, the lab though. I mean, it was just, I was wearing high heels in the lab, okay? It was just a little too happy. I published, obviously I have a PhD in medicinal chemistry. I kind of knew what I was doing, but my personality did not match the lab. And I think it's important as you think about your career journey, not to be restrained by what people think or expect you to do, and B, to constantly question yourself if it's the right setting, if it's making sense. So at that point, I felt that I was ready to embrace that desire to amplify scientific innovation. And so I got my MBA. So Julie, you were not wrong. And the MBA got me into this world of consulting. And consulting is interesting, and I'll get into that later on, because you get to work on different problems at different points in time. So it's always exciting for someone like me. But it was always my love for passion and my passion for science first, and my desire to make it accessible to other people so that they would not be so intimidated by it. And I was an adjunct professor of chemistry for 4 years, and I learned then that chemistry was not exactly anybody's most exciting subject, but I do love chemistry, but more importantly, I love the things that come out of science, and that's actually what led to my podcast. But we'll get into that later on. But it's science first and communication second, but really it's that desire to make an impact that inspires me the most.
That's amazing. I have sophomore twins who are taking honors chemistry right now, so I can attest that it is not for everyone. There's suddenly straight A students who are like, what?
Right.
Very, very difficult subject area, but I tell them it's just good for their brains, right? I love these ideas, and I failed to mention before that we're co-hosting this also with the health and science. We have a new health and science communication major at Rowan, and I know we have a lot of the health communication students here precisely because our college is committed to exactly what both of you are talking about, communicating about science and health and medicine in ways that are accessible to everyone. So we have 2 medicals. Rowan is an interesting school. For those of you who aren't at Rowan, we have 2 medical schools. We have a medical school where you can get your DO and one that you can get your MD. And we're just, will be one of 33, I believe, vet schools. We were just starting a vet school. And so communication, obviously I'm biased, but sort of central to this idea of explaining things to people that doesn't treat them like they're unintelligent, because they aren't. It's just, it's a different way of thinking, different kinds of ideas. So in your, both of you do marketing kinds of things, I would think, or oversee those sorts of things. What are some of the biggest challenges you have with communicating ideas? Do you and related to that, because I think Sophia's gifted at it. I don't know Melissa's background in as much, but I've looked at the podcast. So do you think it's sort of a talent to communicate these things, or can it be learned? And how do you best do it? If that question makes sense.
Yeah. Yes, it can be learned. I totally believe that it can be learned. I think that what it requires is for people to listen first. And a lot of people don't realize that a huge part of communicating is listening, paying attention to the people you're interacting with, because you can't be at the same speed all the time. So depending on what group you're communicating with, and I know Sophia does this amazingly. If you're speaking to, technical folks, doctors, physicians, you're going to communicate one way. If you're talking to your family, you're going to communicate another way. If you're talking to, in a very informal setting, it's something yet different. But it's also about reading the room and understanding when to accelerate and when to decelerate. So yes, it can be learned, but it's important for you as communicators to learn to listen and even use all of your senses as you're interfacing with people. And that translates even into writing grants. And I know we're going to be talking a little bit more about the technical piece later, but telling a story is all about understanding your audience, and it can be learned. I mean, Sophia, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I want to just jump in real quick before Sophia, because that's literally the first communication class so many students take is public speaking. And the first thing we have to explain to them is that it's not a one way, it's a feedback loop, right? Yes. Like you have to be, and then of course I'm a rhetorical critic by training, so understanding audiences is fundamental to that. So that just speaks a lot to me and my background. Sophia.
Yeah, I mean, well, thank you for calling me gifted. That's very nice of you. But I completely agree with everything Melissa said. I do think that it depends on what you're trying to achieve, right? So there are different tools when it comes to communication. For me, podcasting was not something that I ever thought I would do. I'm a hardcore lab scientist. Like I don't know, I just never saw myself becoming a podcasting person. But when the pandemic hit, I couldn't travel to medical conferences like I used to before. Right. And that's how I was able to engage and build relationships with people. And I think that when you're going to run a business or when you have communications in mind, you have to think about value, right? Ultimately, a consultancy or any business is about maximizing the value that you provide to your client. So I could be that person that is on LinkedIn sending those very annoying cold emails about that, it's like, oh, I have a typewriter for you. I'm like, wait, what? Like, like they don't think about what they're writing, just like sending out stuff as a way to engage. Or I can be intentional and purposeful about what I'm trying to achieve. For you to be intentional in your communication, though, it does require some level of mastery of the topic. So what helped me to have a podcast and to have different types of guests, and these are very senior executives within the industry. Imagine I'm talking with the CEO of the American Cancer Society. It's nice to know one or two things about cancer, right? So I think that if you want to become good at a communication tool, say it's podcasting or writing or whatever the case might be, and I do both, I think it's important to master the subject, master something, and then you can build on that, because the world where we're living in today is requiring some level of mastery. And what I found challenging about my PhD was I was extremely good about histone deacetylase enzymes. I knew every isoenzyme of it, but that's like blah. What was important about my MBA is how to take that knowledge and turn it into something that has value. And I'm in a field where everybody thinks they're good at communication. Like every scientist is just like, oh, I wrote a paper published in Nature, I'm really good at this science stuff. And so they devalue communications. They're not exactly thinking, I'm going to start up a biotech company. Let me hire a PR firm or let me hire a marketing agency to support me. It's like, oh, we're good at this. Let's write this press release that no one will understand. And let's just go ahead and issue it. But the industry is changing. So my point in saying this is that communication is innate. To Melissa's point, there are things that you just have to learn. You have to read body language, you have to read the room, and you have to tailor the message to the audience. But if you want to become a master at communication, it'll be very important for you to have some level of subject matter expertise
Yes.
something that you know well of, and then you can build on that. And that will help your confidence, and it will help you to build a following that is natural, and you don't have to force it. It's just part of who you are.
That's wonderful. Do you find, thank you for that, both of you. Do you find, Sophia, that the people that are at the highest levels of their fields, which is who you're interviewing, are
Yeah.
they cognizant of the community? I would imagine that they would be cognizant of how important communication is. Have you ever been surprised? Not that you should name anyone.
Oh, no, not naming any names. No, I think there's a bigger desire to control the story. So it's like, oh, do I get to see this before it goes out? I'm like, nope.
Yeah.
So that's it. I'm gonna share the questions with you, and you're gonna know what the questions are. You state what you say, and so that's on you, right? And I think that we sometimes over edit, overproduce things to the point where it's like, wait, what was the story? So I just allow it to be organic. And so if you want to be on my podcast, it's because you want to be on there and you have a perspective. But just because you're the CEO of BIO, which is the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, the largest advocacy organization in the world, I'm very excited to speak with her. But at the same time, I'm not going to give up my sort of intellectual property to you because you're such and such. So I respect them, give them questions and such. They appreciate communication. If you have more visibility, it's easier to get those people on your podcast. But I know the first season of my podcast was a little bit more challenging, right? Because you're still building a name for yourself. Now I'm have conversations with the president of Pfizer Oncology, and it's like, oh, season 5. I'm like, we are still in season 4, but sure, let's talk about that. So long story short, for me, earnestness, that persistence, that ability to just keep pushing through, even when you don't have people on your side cheering you on. I think to me, that makes your communication the most natural because it's part of who you are. And that's what people appreciate, right? So if you're going to do this, I think one more thing we need to add to our list is the authenticity. You have to be natural, otherwise it's not sustainable.
That is so important. And I have found that in my own work, and I am not an interviewer by training. I have a PhD in rhetorical criticism. I teach in the classroom. You know, this is not my thing that I thought I was going to be doing either. And I love it because I love people and I love to talk to people about all sorts of different ideas. But I have been asked to do other things. And sometimes, like, if you want me to follow a strict script, I'm probably not your gal, because I'll be like, oh, there's a squirrel that reminded me of another squirrel. And, you know, that's just who I am. And so I think I said to both of you, like, it's really going to be organic and we'll go kind of with the conversation. But I think people know that. I think people know when it's organic and know when you're interested in people and talking to them, and when you've just got to get a checklist. So that's kind of an interesting, I found that myself. So that resonates a lot with me. For the students, let's shift a little bit about if they wanted, before, and I want to save plenty of room for our health equity conversations and more about communication in a sec, but also if they want to have a field in health communication. And part of my goal is to spotlight different kinds of careers for our students that they might not normally think of. Right. So what kind of, I know our students had those questions, what kind of courses should they be taking? Do you have to have a passion for this, or you shouldn't go into the field? Those kinds of things. What do you think? I'll start with Melissa. What do you think it takes to work in, and then kind of related to that, if you could talk about some of your duties and things so they would kind of have an understanding of that.
Yeah, well, first, let me answer one of the things that you just touched on. I think that you should have a passion for anything that you're looking to do. So what degree that is, you know, it depends on the person. But if you're entering into any field, any pursuit, and you're not approaching it with some sort of mission or why that's driving you, you will quickly run into a wall, because there are going to be days where you don't feel like doing it. Where it's difficult to get up. And I know Sophia runs into this. It's hard to sit in front of the camera and or microphone and talk to people. That other piece is what drives you. So you should be bringing some sort of passion to it. But in terms of what you should be learning, it's not just one thing, of course. I think that you should absolutely be honing your verbal, your oral communication skills. 1, 2, anything that's going to allow you to tighten up your writing. And here's why I'm saying that. And those sound very basic, but they are so important. I can't tell you how many times I've had someone come to me who's had an amazing resume, well recommended, and sit in front of me and can't put a few sentences together. Or they send me an email, or they send me some sort of communication, or they give me a writing sample if I want to see how they write grants or some sort of business writing. And it makes no sense, or it makes very little sense, or it's not at the level that I would expect. So I would highly recommend that if you're going to enter into this space, don't devalue it because it's healthcare. Don't think that because the mission is so strong, and you understand the mission of healthcare, and you want to help people, you want to go into and support the community, that's going to be enough. Because on the other side of the table, too often, there are going to be people who you have to convince to give you funding, give you resources, partner with you in a way that's going to help to move the community forward, partner with you in a way that's going to help to elevate the visibility of disparities, so that you can then partner together to fight them and to work to support the people who are going to be fighting them. So you need to be able to communicate, and this goes to something that Sophia said a little while ago, your expertise, and you can only do that if you have those essentials of very, very clear and strong oral communication skills and extremely strong writing skills. And the writing skills go a couple different ways. And I know we're going to be touching on a little bit more of this. There's a technical piece. So that's a totally different type of writing than informal communications. So they both have their place. So I would say the fundamentals, and then you can take the time to fill in the gaps with the little gray areas, with the mission and the specifics about the field that you're entering into. It's not just one kind of a black and white. So yeah, fundamentals.
That's excellent advice. And yes, on the typos and the I have it beside the phone and the interview, right? Like, oh Lord. Sophia, your thoughts on that?
No, I think that writing is at the core of communication. For me, you're writing a grant, it's a grant, you're writing it, right? You're writing the script for a podcast, that's writing. You're writing an editorial, as in my case, I just recently published, I think, Julie, you found out about me through the Philadelphia Inquirer when I wrote a equity piece, right? And I published for WebMD, Inc., Entrepreneur, etc. But I think that, but then I've also we just wrapped up a white paper with the American Society of Gene and Cell Therapy. So talking about that difference between like technical writing and editorials and such, right? I think that sometimes we're so afraid of failing that we don't even try. And I think that for you to be good at anything, you have to be open to that possibility for some type of critique, right? So the first time I work with an editor, for example, it's going to be a little bit tricky because they have their style, you have your style, but afterwards you get into a sync. But oftentimes, because people don't want to hear it, it's like you close the door. I'll give you an example. I was taking honors classes in college. This was Bowling Green, Ohio. Story for a different day. But every time I write a paper, my professor will put this P sign on top, needs P. And I'm like, what P? I don't know what P he's talking about. So this happened 3 or 4 times, and he would take off points for me. And then it just started to annoy me. I was like, well, are you just gonna be annoyed, or are you going to go to him and ask him, what is this P thing? He's like, oh, sorry, you need paragraphs. That's what I was trying to tell you. I was like, oh, the P is for paragraph. All right. So that's it. So now I'm obsessed with paragraph. I'm obsessed with bullet points. And just because somebody just kept saying the same thing to me over and over again. I think the final point is to have fun. I've learned this journey towards entrepreneurship came about from a profound need for flexibility and autonomy. And this is pre-pandemic, pre-Great Resignation, pre-working from home as norm. I needed it. And I sensed that for myself, that that's the next stage of my life, what I wanted. And personally, professionally, I wanted to enjoy the things that I've worked so hard for. I went to school for much of my adult life. It's not a lot of fun in that. And watching TV and working on a computer was my idea of passion and fun. And so I say, just find fun in what you do Don't be afraid to be criticized for your writing, even if it's paragraphs. We can all learn and we can all grow. I remember at the core of all communication is that ability to write. If you can't put together a good sentence, it's going to be hard for you to vocalize that sentence or to publish that sentence. So to keep practicing and to keep learning. And finally, I think epidemiology, public health is so important. One of the things that has always helped me out in life is that why. Melissa, you talked about it. When I was doing my PhD research, I won an award at the New England Science Symposium, not because my research was the most cutting edge, was because I said a presentation with a very simple statement: cancer is the second leading cause of death in the United States and a major cause of death worldwide. That was why I was doing cancer research. So don't forget your why, be passionate about what you do, find the joy in it, and don't be afraid of getting criticized for your work. You're going to get better with time.
So can I just,
Wait a
Julie,
minute, Melissa.
you just totally triggered me, Sophia, because I went back to, in a moment, to my Glassboro professor who would torment me about my commas.
Are you an Oxford comma person or no Oxford comma person?
I just overdid the commas apparently. I'm like, why? What is wrong with the commas? But to this day, all these years later, and I see Sandy laughing, all these years later, I panic about, am I using too many commas?
That's hilarious. I've had lengthy debates about the Oxford comma. I want to touch on something that Sophia mentioned about confidence. And there has been this theme for several, so we've been doing these for a year. I'm listening to ones that our sister centers also sponsor. And there seems to be this idea that, this thread rather, that this notion of confidence seems to be harder for women in our culture. Obviously not essentializing that, but just sort of, we have PhDs, we run things, and we're still like, I don't know. And I wondered if you faced that. And related to that, I know several of our students had asked the question of whether you felt you faced obstacles as a woman, and I would also add as a woman of color, and sort of what those are. If you could speak to those ideas. And I would just tell you for myself, I have struggled with confidence my whole life, and then I turned 50 and got full professor, and now people are annoyed with me because I'm like now I just won't stop. Because there was just something about that just kind of triggered confidence in me. So I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, I'm not sure who you were directing it to.
You can go, Melissa. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Both of you, but start, Melissa.
I think there's so much I want to say to that. I mean, it's
say it all.
Say it all. So I think as women in general, we struggle with that whole imposter syndrome, right? Like, are we supposed to be in the room? And that comes from many, generations of programming to think that, okay, we're supposed to be doing this and not that. And, if we're sitting at the table, then it must be because we were allowed to somehow. So we feel like we have to fight harder, do differently. And when we're even there, and when our voices are being heard, or we have the platform to have our voices heard, we're still kind of battling with people who wonder why our voices are even there, or if we deserve to be there, or we perceive it that way. So yes, that exists, and that's something that we battle. Now I'm going to add to layer on top of that, as a woman of color and as a Black woman, there are so many other dimensions to it, because there's the intersectionality of the racism and sexism that Black women are battling with all the time. And so it's not only the external voices that you hear, but the internal voices, because of what has been programmed into society and what we've heard over and over that we have to deal with. Do I speak loudly because I'm going to be perceived as angry or scary or threatening? So at all times, having to not only modulate your voice, but also your body language. So I tend to do all this. I'm very much me, my hands are flying all the time.
I think that's because you're from the South.
That's probably a Southern thing too. It's a Southern thing. So that Southern thing also, I'm loud. I tend to be loud and proud, but it can, in certain settings, I know that it can be threatening or scary or whatever to different people. So learning how to communicate and the nuances of communication as a woman and as a Black woman has required my learning different skill sets over the years. Is learning some different, you know, we talked about the nuances of communication and reading the room and understanding who you're talking to, adjusting to that. And here's what I will say to all of the women on the line and young women students. And you're going to be angry about that. And let's just be honest and give ourselves room to appreciate that. That there will be times where you resent that. There will be times where you're frustrated by that. There have been times over my career where I've been frustrated by that. And that's the reality that we live in. So what I will suggest is this, and this is what I've learned now 50 years later, that's okay, number one, and that give yourself the room to heal through that, and then find your authenticity. Find the authenticity of your voice. So do not lose yourself. Adjust, do what you need to do. As with anything else, setting is everything. But do not lose your authentic self, because once you start to do that, once you start to give that piece away, then all of the communication, all of the effectiveness of your communication starts to drain as well. So it's not going to be easy, and you all are going to need to find it for yourself. There's no one size fit all for this. What works for me, what works for Sophia, what works for Julie will not work for all of you. But you do need to find your authentic self in that. But it is something that's a struggle. It is something that's real. And it is a really critical part of understanding not only how you are communicating, but how other people are communicating with you.
So important, resonates so much with me. Again, I love this notion of authenticity that we keep going back to. And I've had experiences of my own, and obviously I'm a white woman, so coming from a lot of privilege, but of being pushed into positions where I am doing things that I know are not authentic, taking on roles at work that I didn't really want to do, that you have to be a certain way. And so it just really resonates a lot with me. And Sophia, I know that you come to this not only as a Black woman, but also as someone from a Nigerian American, or from Nigeria. So if you could sort of talk about that immigrant status as well, that would be lovely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that confidence is a journey. And
Yes.
if you see it as that, you'll be kinder to yourself. I think as you get older, you deal with some good things and some bad things, right? So there's a knowledge that comes with age, and also the wrinkles that come with age, that crimps for that. But the knowledge that comes with age is actually one that is phenomenal. For me, obviously, the first time I came to the US, I don't think I was perceived the same way that I'm being perceived today. And it was also a different time. I'm not saying that this was in 1982, it was in 2002. But 2002 is different from 2022. I think that 2002 was just, this is me in Ohio, so I'm in the Midwest, which is not exactly the most culturally diverse. I mean, it's not New York City by any stretch of the imagination. And so we were a minority. Like, it was just, there were probably like 20 Black students in a school that had 20,000 students, right? So, and those Black students were my brothers, my sister, and a few friends from back home. So it was literally like this little pocket, right? So it was like 1% of the students were Black, or yeah. And then I don't even think we had, did we have any Asian students? There's just not a lot of diversity. And you end up sticking out for sometimes just the most obvious reasons. And I think for me, I'm like, come on, like, is that the only thing, you're from Africa? Oh, how does it feel to wear clothes? I'm like, yeah, because this is, I mean, I've heard some things that it's like, what do I choose to focus on in my American journey? Do I remember the times when I was asked these very condescending questions, as if like, you think that it's still 1822 in Africa, or you think Africa is a country versus a continent? You don't understand. Oh, how did you learn how to speak English? Now, I'll tell you, I got detained for 2 hours my first day in America. And this is me coming into the airport. It's like, oh, what's your name? Sophia. Like, Sophia, yeah, my name is actually Sophia. It's like, oh, have you been to the US before? No. Are you sure? Yeah, this is my first time. And I got detained because they couldn't believe. It's like, well, your English is too good for someone coming to the US for the first time. But you don't realize that Nigeria actually has one of the highest numbers of English speakers in the world. So I think that there's a lot of ignorance that can only be forgiven if not for anything else. Because if you carry those scars, those words, those insults, if you carry it with you, there's a heaviness that comes with that. And I think for much of my journey, though, I was heavy. I think, again, it wasn't until I emancipated myself and I chose to go for what I wanted. I didn't want to be a traditional or anything. I was already a professor. It wasn't for me. It's not that I don't like teaching. I just felt like I wanted to have a bigger impact than a singular classroom or a singular clinic or a singular lab. I wanted to have that global impact. And it was born from being born in a place where there were not a lot of options and being ignored for the most part for a long time, until I learned how to amplify my voice. But I also learned that the best way to amplify your voice is to partner with other people that support you and share some kind of vision. You can go very fast by yourself, right? I did that for much of my career when I was getting educated, but after becoming a full-blown professional, come through my own consulting firm, it was about going far and having that maximum impact. So to recap what I was saying, I started by talking about confidence being a journey. It really is. As you get older, that things you learn along the way. But whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, immigrant, non-immigrant, I think ultimately your confidence comes when you finally find your voice and you start to speak up for the things that matter. And you're kinder to yourself, not so hard on yourself for whatever mistakes you think that you've made. And you find ways to trust people, to build those meaningful relationships, even if you've been given every reason to not trust. You find ways to forgive and to move forward.
I love both of your responses so much. And I appreciate hearing, both personally and for our students, this notion of, from Melissa, you're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to be upset, because I think we're conditioned to squelch that. And then also, and all of what you said was important, but these two things particularly resonated with me. This idea of confidence being a journey, because we can also be angry at ourselves or frustrated ourselves that we don't have enough confidence. I've been in that situation before where I've had imposter syndrome, and then I'm mad at myself because I have imposter syndrome. It's like this, snowballing. And also this idea of, if you do remain, so you're allowed to have that anger, but if you I love that idea of carrying it and being this kind of heavy weight that it's ultimately destructive to you. Other people's ignorance is kind of there. I mean, it impacts you, but it's also their problem, and you shouldn't have to carry that weight for them. And it's taken a long time to me, I'll be in a meeting. It happens frequently where I'll say something, and then a guy says the same thing, man will say the same thing, and they'll ignore me, and then they'll be like, oh my God, that's such a great idea. And I've started calling people out on it, which is probably not good, but I used to just get really upset about it and kind of eat away. And that's just a small example of something, or being told you can't do something, those kinds of things. I want to shift gears. Well, it's not really shifting gears. It's really all the same in terms of these. We're talking about health disparities and health crises. And so I know that we know of the pandemic and the COVID-19 health crises. I wanted to speak with you both a little bit about your specific fields where you either are now or where you came from. So I'll start again with Melissa, if that's okay, to talk about the challenges you see with mental health and communicating mental health as health. And then I'm interested too, Sophia, in yours about the cancer research, how it might collide, whether your commitments to that, whether you think that's still the most important, if you think that's been continued to be highlighted, or if it's the global pandemic has taken over, those kinds of things. But I'll start with Melissa first and I know we've had private conversations about this, mental health is health. If you could speak to that.
Yeah, one of the productive things that's come out of the pandemic is this raised consciousness about the importance of mental health and how that is affected and impacted by everything that goes on around us. And this is something those of us who've been in this field for some time have known. Reimbursement doesn't always follow the same thinking or the same path. Processes don't always follow the same path. Clinical interventions don't always align, but it is something that's always been an issue. But the pandemic made it even more present and part of the national conversation in a way that it had not been, and in a way that helped to remove some of the stigma that a lot of us who are in the field have had to work around or work with. Integrated care, of course, requires this cooperation and collaboration between and among different entities to help to make sure that a person has whole health. And a big part of that, of course, is their mental health. We've seen significant increases in mental health concerns for young people around the country. That's just as a whole. And when you dig down into the Black community, the Latino community, you see even higher disparities, which is terrifying. You see more attempted suicides. And we're looking at the young people, and then you kind of go out into the adult population. You see higher substance use disorders. It's just tragedy at this point. So the pandemic helped to raise the consciousness, and also, which was good, helped to put into place legislation that allowed more telehealth, that allowed these companies to connect with patients who hadn't historically been connected with, that allowed these for-profit organizations to be able to provide access to care in a way that had not been done, which is important. I mean, that's a key part of it. What I would also say is that there's more that needs to be done with that. So that's not the end of it, because we also know a lot of the folks who are dealing with mental health concerns have other issues. So we can't deal with that in a silo the way that we have historically dealt with the physical health component in a silo. It does need to be addressed within a larger social context. So that's the great thing. Now, in terms of the communication around it, that's what's helped to lead us to this place. So within the pandemic, the conversation about mental health shifted from one of, okay, this is, Uncle Bob who has, problems, and he's crazy, and he put him in the back room, to understanding that this is an important issue that should be spoken about as a part of overall wellness. I've seen young people who are now taking ownership of their mental health and talking about it in a way that's very productive, in a way that's very supportive of each other. And that's all about different communication in different spaces. So there's the communication that's taking place kind of from the media's lens. There's communication that's changing from the role of the providers. So we're talking about it differently, and engaging with each other differently, and engaging with the communities differently. So everyone now is starting to move in the same way and starting to talk the same way. We've always talked about removing the stigma attached to mental health, but now it's actually, there's fertile ground for it, and it's happening in a way that's truly impactful. So the communication has really been a big part of moving that forward.
We have seen that on our campus. So the students have been taking, sorry for my light, but the students have been taking ownership of their mental health and demanding mental health resources.
Yes.
Because it's shifted. I mean, when I started at Rowan in 1998, and I don't know how many wellness center people we had. It was in, like, I think, a dormitory, and it was in the basement, and it was a doctor, and if you had the sniffles, like, mental health was just not part of that issue. Now we have many counselors, but it's such a part of the students' experience. And I've been really proud of the students to really say, we need more resources, here. You can't just kind of ship us off other places. And Sophia, I was not very eloquent asking that question before, but I know our students are really interested in your role as a Pfizer scientist, as the Yale postdoctoral researcher, what you did there, how communication and sort of what your passion is about those areas.
Yeah, I started out my career as a Pfizer scientist, and it was exciting, walking into the Pfizer's largest research and development headquarters. We literally had like 5 companies in one spot. It was also intimidating. I was working with 5,000 scientists, some of the brilliant minds behind Lyrica, Lipitor, Viagra, all the drugs that people know, the blockbuster drugs that people know Pfizer for. But I also felt a little bit lost. I just, it was also, how do I say this nicely? It was a boys' club. It wasn't just a boys' club. It was a white boys' club. And so I was just the only Black girl that was in the whole department. I'm like, okay, I mean, it's okay. I mean, life goes on. And then there was something about, and I'm making a point here, there's something about minorities, and when we see each other, like, oh, hi, I see you. So when I first joined Pfizer, a lot of the Black people would come to the lab and say hi. And then my first report, or my first meeting with my supervisor, I got in trouble because I was too friendly. It's like, okay, I don't know about this company. I don't know if this is the right place to be right now with my life. And I'm young, like I have the whole of my life ahead of me. But I also recognize that I was lacking something. I wanted to be a leader, but I wanted to lead with science, and I didn't have a PhD, and that's the gold standard. So I'm like, you know what? This PhD stuff is going to be very difficult. And why don't we find the most challenging PhD to get? Oh yeah, let's look into medicinal chemistry. Let me challenge myself for the next few years to elevate my thinking as a scientist, to know what those Lipitor, those medicinal chemists, what they knew. I want to know it too. Then I got into my PhD program, and I realized I didn't actually like synthesizing drugs. Like, it was like watching Breaking Bad. And if I didn't like watching Breaking Bad, then I don't want to be a synthetic chemist. Okay, so I wanted to characterize drugs. That was my thing. I wanted to figure out, what do they do? And it was always impact, impact, impact for me. So I get to my postdoctoral program, and I'm at Yale, and my PhD was at UConn, and University of Connecticut has this beautiful campus in Storrs. We have Jonathan, the husky, the mascot, is very nurturing. Yale is not. Yale is cutthroat. So I get in there, I was like, okay, all right, what do you want to do with your life? I mean, you kind of have to figure it out. But what helped me at Yale was, in addition to doing my postdoctoral work in breast cancer research, I joined the Yale Entrepreneurial Institute. And that's where I met one of my advisors today. And he was actually the one that invited me to join the Yale Entrepreneur in Residence program shortly after I started my consultancy. But I think, doing case, when you went to go into consulting, you have to do a lot of case practices, right? Figure out how to think quickly on your feet. And that's what it was. And I had a choice. I could do the quantitative thinking, go work at Goldman Sachs as a private wealth management person and do that type of quantitative thinking, right? Or I could stay closer to that public health, closer to communication, closer to marketing, which is what I really was passionate about. And so after my MBA, I decided that was the route I was going to go. So long story short, I love science. I continue to love science. I hate the lab. It's very restrictive, but I published. I have a patent from my PhD work. And so that technical writing ability really changes the way that you think analytically. It makes you to question the work in front of you. Do you have citations for, can you prove this work? If somebody picks up any editorial that I've written, do I have the right citations at any given point in time where I can defend the work that I've done? So I think education for me is challenging. It's difficult. It makes you, want to pull your hair out sometimes. But if you can allow yourself to go through that refinement that it can give you, it elevates the way that you think. And whatever you want to think quantitatively or qualitatively, and sometimes you have to do both. You ultimately have to figure out, where do I play best? Where can I be my best self? Don't force it. If it's not working for you, the earlier you identify it, the better for you. I identified in my life fairly early who I wanted to be, and I think it's allowed me to be fairly successful at a fairly early stage in my life, right? But it also doesn't allow me to become too comfortable. I think when you're going to own a small business, there are no off days. But I've also learned that, yes, there might not be any off days, but there are vacation days, and I'm going to give it to myself, period. Right? I have to take those mental health breaks. I have to realize to set boundaries on my time. A lot of people have access to my online scheduling platform, and I share it with them once. And no, Julie, I'm telling you the truth. Like, they will just start popping things in. I'm like, that was for that one meeting, remember? And then they set up a recording. And
I'm making a face like I think I did that.
No. But my point is just around protecting your time and being honest, because we're in a world that thinks, I have clients that think that me reading their emails is not work. I'm like, what did you think that was? I mean, hello. So you have to protect your time, protect your space, and go with your passion and be patient with the process, because you're not going to get there overnight. That's it. Like, there's no way about it. It took me a long time, and I had to do a lot of stuff I didn't like. I drew the line at killing mice. That's just, I didn't want to do animal studies. But in my lifetime, I probably worked on 50 or 60 different types of cancer cells. And they've come from human beings. And you're in the lab trying to figure out, how do I kill this cancer? I think if you've done that type of life-changing experience, I think it's changed the way that I look at things. And then add that to the fact that I was born in a developing country where a lot of people still live under $2 a day. And then it makes you fortunate for the air that you breathe and the time that you have. And you say to yourself, no matter what bitterness or anger I have, I'm gonna let it go because there's so much beauty that lies ahead. And communication is about capturing the ugliness and the beauty as well, but balancing it out and making it as impactful as possible.
What a powerful message. Absolutely. Really, really powerful. And I want our students to remember too, this idea of entrepreneurship, of starting their own businesses, their own communication firms. That's also, a job option if you're passionate. I mean, Sophia is a living example of that. So absolutely. I want to also encourage the students and anyone on the call really to go ahead and put those questions, if you have them, in the chat because we're coming up on the hour here. So I want to be able to get to them. But I do want to talk about the health disparities and how communication, we've been talking about it, but even more specifically, and I think it was Melissa, Melissa and I had this conversation about how do you negotiate being a critical consumer of health communication without falling down maybe with believing in facts and science. So we had that conversation, right, Melissa? Like, how do you, you want people to be critical consumers, but then people will be like, oh, that's fake news. That's so if you could speak to that, because to me, I see communication is key in addressing these, but I would love to hear both of your comments on that. Go ahead, Melissa.
Yeah, well, here's the interesting thing about communications, and all my communication partners on the line will get this. It's not about the communication necessarily, it's about the goal. So if you focus on the goal and what you're looking to accomplish, that will inform how you communicate and what you communicate. So operate with the goal in mind, so to speak. So when you kind of look at where we are today, and it's very difficult to, if you are a true communicator looking to communicate truth, you're looking to inform people about disparities and what they need to be doing with disparities, you kind of got to wade through a lot of stuff, and you got to wade through a lot of external factors, thinking, prejudices that always are present. But when it comes to certain topics, the temperature is just raised a bit. So if you operate with the end in mind, then you allow yourself the leeway and the flexibility to adjust how and where you're communicating and how much. So you can't necessarily hit people with the full list of disparities if they're not even in a place to understand why these disparities exist. So, it may require you to lay the foundation of, okay, let's understand some of the systemic issues, and even that word will trigger people, but really some of the systemic issues and circumstances that exist to create a certain context. So let's start there. Let's start with kind of the baby food, and then we'll move to the meat. But you can't really give people straight to meat if they're not even ready to admit that the other part is an issue. So I would say that when we're in this space and we're talking about health disparities, and I'm somebody who talks about that a lot, with someone who is in different settings, talking to different people, trying to get funding, trying to encourage some sort of action, reaction, whatever it is, to eliminate these disparities. And it's really interesting, depending on the setting, the response that you get. So some people are truly operating from an altruistic space, and they want to make a change, and they really want to help people. And there are a lot of people like that. I've experienced a lot of people like that. And there are some folks who it's about the dollars and cents. And that's okay too, because the goal is not to necessarily change their thinking. The goal is to get their money so that we can change the system. So, and let's just be real about it. That's what it is. So if that's what you want to talk about, then let's talk about how improving the health of this community now impacts your community financially, how it impacts families and community financially, so then they're able to reinvest. And then you'll see growth in stores, you'll see growth in schools, you'll see improvement in long-term financial stability. So if that's where you need to go, that's where you need to go. So I would say that within this current environment, understanding again that the communication is not the goal, the end goal, what you're looking to accomplish is the goal, then that will help you as communicators configure your type of communication, your approach, even your timing is key.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Excellent. Sophia.
Data are important. I think that I alluded to that earlier. If you want to talk about credibility in communication, especially from a scientific communications perspective, you got to do your research, right? And make sure that you're getting credible sources that will help you with that. One of the reasons why I started my podcast is really around that need for credible scientific information in the world of fake news. And it was interesting to interview the chief medical officer of WebMD, and he used to work at the FDA. And he chose a career in communications because he said, I want to make an impact. And so I think that, to Melissa's point, if you're intentional in the why are you doing this, then it makes it easy. Just make sure when it comes to science and when it comes to healthcare, it's different, right? You have to cite your sources, have that foundational knowledge that's going to help you to have natural confidence to really be good at what you do.
And as consumers of media, we've been talking about, purveyors of media, but as for our students as consumers of media, and I think we've both had these conversations, I've had these conversations with both of you, knowing those sources of where you're getting the information, and knowing that if you consume something on a certain platform, the algorithms will keep sending you more information from similar platforms. So it's very easy to go down this rabbit hole where all of a sudden, the latest one I heard was that the vaccine made you magnetized. There's something going around that there's like, if you put a quarter, the quarter will stay on your vaccine. I don't even know. Makes you magnetized. Like, I just hear these bits and pieces. And again, remember, I have sophomore twins who don't buy into that, but they were like, can you believe people? Anyway, I think that, also we would probably both agree, right, that know where your information comes from. Be mindful. Not all TikTok is equal.
Yes. Well, I'm waiting for the superpower for invisibility. If it gives me invisibility, I'm good.
Right? Like, we're going to be magnetized. Maybe we can
magnetized. Invisibility.
wipe our arm against something. It was the craziest thing I've ever heard. I know we're running out of time, but we did have a question about internships. If you had suggestions about where to find internships.
Go ahead, Sophia.
I mean, I think it depends on what you want to do. I've always been big on tailoring who I want to do with what I want to do. So my internship in college was with the National Science Foundation, and I did a cancer research internship at the Ohio State University. So I think it depends on what you want to do. The FDA Office of Minority Health, they have some great things for communication. If you want to work in a consulting firm for the summer, a lot of them have, especially the bigger consulting practices, they have internships for you. It just depends what you want to do. It's a soul searching exercise, really. I mean, there's Indeed, there's LinkedIn, there's a whole bunch of things, but long story short, I mean, just begin to identify as early as possible what you want to do, and it'll help you to tailor your search.
Wonderful.
Absolutely agreed. I would add to that, don't discount the local nonprofits. Don't discount them. I think that there are some who they may not have a health communications department, but the need is there. So the need is there for marketing. The need is there for grant writing. The need is, and it's huge right now for those different types of skill sets that you all are learning. So I would say, make yourself available, have the conversations, go to the networking events, and allow them to hear what you're able to bring to the table, and they will be highly interested. So don't discount the local nonprofits as well.
Wonderful. And to sum it up, we're at noon. If you don't mind, just any final statements about the state of science and health communication in the world. Are you hopeful? Are you cautiously hopeful? Sophia, we'll start with you.
I think it's tricky, right? Because sometimes I tweet about podcasts, and some people might not like Pfizer because they don't like vaccines, and Pfizer equals vaccines apparently, right? So there's such a gap in information, but I also see the gap as an opportunity. I'm working really hard with a streaming platform to see if I can take my podcast and stream it so that it can be more accessible. I think if you really want to make a difference, you have to be intentional. TikTok, actually a good way for us to disseminate scientific information in a more credible way. One of the reasons why I chose YouTube for my podcast was because it's the world's second largest search engine, and I wanted accessibility to the information. So I think the future of scientific communications is one where we have to be creative, more and more creative about the way we communicate science. It doesn't always have to be so cut and dry. The doctor doesn't have to be the guy with the white lab coat. That different ways for us to elevate how we communicate. And the challenge and it's a challenge, but it's an opportunity for all of us to think differently. That would be what I think. Just think
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, Melissa.
Yeah, what the last thing I would say is now is an exciting time to be a communicator. You are now working within a space, you all are coming into this space now where people are more open to, and this is the good and the bad, more open to having conversations that they haven't wanted to have in the past, or that haven't been as present in the past. Now the environment is ripe for that. So you all are walking into a time that's very different than the one I walked into. I'm not going to say how many years ago. It's very, very different right now. So take advantage of that. Arm yourself with as much skill and knowledge as you can. Get the partnerships. You have platforms that we didn't have starting out to get out messaging, to have partnerships, to communicate effectively. So use those. I would say enjoy this time. So, your question, Julie, I am optimistic right now. I'm optimistic because there's so many opportunities there, because there's so much available to all these folks who are coming to the communications field right now. So absolutely take advantage of it.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. Thank you to everyone who has joined us today. And so absolutely appreciative of Sophia and Melissa, your time. You're incredibly busy people. So your generosity is absolutely greatly appreciated. I know our students appreciate it as well. Thank you so very much. I'll stay on the call for a little while, but I know other people need to go. So again, thank you very much.